You know, there's a word that seems to be popping up everywhere lately. You see it in government policy, you hear it in community meetings, especially when we're talking about working with First Nations peoples. And that word is co-design. Now, if you're feeling a bit skeptical, maybe thinking, here we go again, you're definitely not alone. The researchers behind the framework we're looking at today, they felt exactly the same way. It sounds good, but what does it actually mean? And that's really the question we're digging into here. Is co-design a real breakthrough for making sure marginalized voices are finally at the center of decision-making? Or is it just a fancy new label for the same old consultation that hasn't worked for decades? To really get our heads around co-design, we've got to start with what it's trying to fix. And that means taking a hard look at the old model of consultation, a path that, for many Indigenous communities, is a very, very well-trodden one. I mean, on the surface, the dictionary definition seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it? A meeting to discuss or get advice. It sounds collaborative, it sounds respectful, but as we know, the reality of consultation can be a totally different story. And this quote from an elder, it just hits right at the heart of the problem. It captures all that frustration built up over years and years. This feeling that consultation is just a tick box exercise where people give their time and their wisdom, and then nothing changes. And here's why it so often feels. The biggest issue? Governments and organizations aren't actually required to do anything with the advice they get. It keeps the power exactly where it's always been, at the top. So even with the best intentions, it can end up just creating the look of inclusion without any of the real substance. And this isn't just a theory, right? We saw this play out on a national scale. Looking at the 2023 Voice referendum, where a majority of Indigenous Australians voted yes, it points to this really clear, powerful call for new ways of working together, ways that go way beyond just being consulted. So this brings us to the big comparison. What makes Codesign so different? And we're not talking about a small adjustment here. We're talking about a fundamental philosophical shift. And honestly, it boils down to this simple but incredibly powerful idea. It's moving away from doing things to a community and instead working with that community right from the very start. This table just lays it out so clearly. Have a look at the difference in every single row. With consultation, the organization comes in, says, here's the problem, here's the solution, and holds all the power. But with co-design, the problem is defined together. The solutions are developed together. And that foundation shifts from being just a transaction to being truly relational, built on real respect and reciprocity. Okay, so seeing these huge gaps, the researchers decided to build a better way. Not just based on good ideas, but on solid evidence, and most importantly, shaped by the voices and lived experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And their work showed just how badly this was needed. They did a full systematic review of Australian Indigenous education policy. And you want to guess how many useful papers they found on co-design? 15. Just 15. That's it. It just goes to show how new this all is and why having a proper evidence-based framework is absolutely critical. And this is what they came up with, a framework built around 6 core principles. And these aren't just nice-to-haves. The research shows these are the non-negotiables, the essential ingredients to make co-design actually work. All right, so those are the principles, but what do they look like in the real world? How do you take them from a piece of paper into actual practice? Let's get into it using the words of the people involved in the research. Okay, let's take the first one. Indigenous leadership. In practice, this means you start by listening. Not listening for feedback on an idea you already have, but listening to actually figure out what the problem is in the first place, together. Wow. This quote from a school principal says it all, doesn't it? It's just a perfect example of what happens when you genuinely let go of control. He had his own ideas, his own agenda. But by actually listening, the whole project shifted to fill a need that, from his position, he couldn't even see. That is what Indigenous leadership looks like in action. Okay, now for shared power. This can feel a bit abstract, but one of the most powerful ways to put it into practice is surprisingly simple. It's about time. It means ditching the rigid, top-down deadlines and accepting that building trust and real relationships, well, that can't be rushed. And this Aboriginal community member just nails it.
You can't just steamroll ahead because a deadline is looming. If people aren't on the same page, you have to stop. You have to give that time. That simple act of stopping, that is an act of sharing power.
And when you get this right, the potential is just enormous. As this Aboriginal policymaker puts it, good co-design ensures that policies are actually made for the people they're supposed to serve, putting local knowledge and expertise right at the center of both design and delivery.
So if you take one thing away from all this, let it be this. This is not just a new process. It's not a new checklist or a different way to run a workshop. It's a fundamental shift. It's about decolonizing our approaches, valuing Indigenous knowledge as expertise, and rebuilding relationships on a foundation of real respect and truly shared power.
Which leaves us all with a pretty big question to reflect on in our own work, in our own communities. What could happen if we truly start by listening? If we let the community hold the power to define the problem? Just imagine what incredible new solutions we might discover that right now are completely out of sight.